Welcome to the She Heals the World talk show with Dr.S, the place to hear stories of heart-driven women creatively living free. Our episodes highlight conversations and insights that support the values of self-care, creative and personal freedom, slower living, happiness, health, and wellness to help you live your absolute best life. To be a part of the movement and join the conversation, step inside our free Facebook group, She Heals the World, and say hello. It brings me great joy to bring you our next episode.
Hey everybody, welcome to the She Heals the World talk show. So today's talk show is interesting and fun. I have Dr. Rachel joining us. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, and today we're talking about communication, specifically as it relates to love and relationships. So really on topic for this time of the year. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started as a psychologist?
Sure, Dr. S, and thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be in connection and get to connect, with your community and offer some insight, I hope.
Totally.
My path professionally in terms of career has always been extraordinarily linear. So that is to say, it seems that from an early on, I sort of was equipped with the skill set that I think psychologists need and the interest. As soon as it became time for me to determine what I was going to study, it was like this underlying knowing. And I just never veered from it. It was just too right. Sort of like a calling. And the more I sort of learned and pursued in the field, the honestly, and still is the case today, the more voracious my appetite is for what's next for me and for growing and expanding and in my capacity to help heal myself and those who find themselves in my office or as part of my community.
One thing I love about your work and especially like your social media, I noticed that the field of, so before I became a coach, I actually wanted to be a psychologist. I started like in counseling psychology and everything for grad school. And so I dipped a little bit in the world before I turned left. And
Sure.
one thing I noticed is that like the psychology world, as far as social media marketing and business, like it's a little behind the 8 ball in terms of showing up, right, and creating a community and a tribe and a business. And what I love about you and what you're doing is like that doesn't seem to be your case. And so I kind of look at you as a model, even for the folks who are in that field listening today. And I wonder how did you learn to create a business in addition to this beautiful practice? What were some of the hurdles you had to overcome in doing that?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I think it's the dawn of a new day. I think for the field of psychology, but also for women who are interested in pursuing entrepreneurship, right? And so I think for so long, throughout my studies, I was, part of that linear path was conditioning that led me to believe I wouldn't be okay if I went off on my own, or rather, I'm sure it was in part that, but it was also like a deep-seated fear-based belief I had that I couldn't. And so so I sort of was in the field after licensure, working along a path that I'm very grateful to have had the experience for, but that increasingly I knew I didn't want to be in and wasn't right for me, and was in a system that felt really oppressive to me and the patients I was trying to support. And so it required, and this was, only just really recently that I sort of unleashed this courage to take a risk to do this the way that I feel like I want to, honestly. And it's really exciting to feel like I am entering a what I call like a type of sovereignty in my practice, in my business, in my own capacity to create whatever it is I want. And I was feeling limited. And so I think it required that risk taking and the courage, and it still does, like every day, almost in every moment. And sometimes I feel more aligned with that than others.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I don't, when I doubt, or when I worry, or when I experience anything that I think is natural that comes up as, as business owners really doing this, I'm with that, and I listen to that, and I stay curious about it, and I ultimately just don't give up on myself, and reach out for whatever support I need so that I can feel bolstered in these endeavors.
I love that you said you reach out to whatever support you need, because so many women try to do it on their own. And I
Mm,
think like we don't leverage the power of support so much because of pride and ego. And so
mm,
I love
mm.
that you kind of recognize that and put that right on the forefront as you've been building. Like, what has been one of your greatest wins? Like, what can you look back on today and be like, oh my God, I cannot believe that happened?
I just sort of alluded to it, and I think to date it's been the most sort of pointed turn for me, which was leaving that job, which I only did a few months ago, actually.
Mm,
So I had been building, my website and my creative pursuits, and really giving that energy on the side. And I was feeling really stuck in this role in this system. And so through a series of, explorations and transformations and liberations that I had to stick with in myself, I got to a place where I just knew I wasn't a prisoner, and I didn't have to stay there anymore if I knew I didn't want to, and if it wasn't right for me. And sort of from there, then I feel like I was divinely met with all the right ingredients to allow me to feel safe enough to go.
mm.
And so I did. I left that job, and took the risk to go off on my own, which is where I find myself today. And
Yeah.
that was huge, huge.
Congratulations. The
Thank
work.
you.
As you have been building this, like I just want to touch on your childhood really quickly before we go into like some of the tips that you have for us, because I'd love to hear like your perspective on life and love. Like, what was growing up like for you, and did you think naturally, given the experiences that you had, that you'd be doing this kind of work today?
Hmm. Um, Growing up for me was in many ways privileged and loving, and you know, uh, sacred. And I endured my own experiences of intergenerational trauma, attachment injuries. I had a father who struggled with mental illness. I had a mother who had to, be invulnerable and sort of forge forward for a few different reasons. And that rendered me, as a very sensitive child in need of close emotional attunement, dealing with the ramifications of didn't that I really didn't understand until later on in life, when I entered romantic relationships with men and
Mm,
would be acting in these ways that felt really outside of who I knew I was, but was like yeah, it really confounded me. I didn't understand who this version of me was that was sort of raging out and drinking to the point of blacking out, and it wasn't until it sort of reached a really ugly place that I had to like closely examine what the hell this was.
mm,
And it wasn't until then that I could really confront some of the early childhood traumas that I endured, really a series of, despite, how loving and well intentioned my family was. I did experience these sort of assaults to my psyche and to my emotional body that I continue to work to heal. Yeah, and so I shared that, to say that I think for many who experience that type of trauma can really be a portal into healing and insight. And for many clinicians, I think, who do the type of work I do, oftentimes we have been there ourselves, and it is through that experience that we know what we need to support others through it too.
Mm.
And like I said earlier, I think innately I was predisposed to embody these. Like, I think just my natural character is extremely sensitive and capable of attuning to others in really refined and nuanced ways. And so that was just a natural, gift that I think I bring to my work and brings the work to me. So that, coupled with my life's conditions, I think just set me up for this really beautiful chance to understand what I need and who I am, and then, get out of my own way there so that I can be this true, tender, sweet woman in relationships that are healthy and fulfilling and deep.
Mm-hmm. So along with that, as we're chatting a little bit about these relationships that are fulfilling and being able to be vulnerable and available and open to letting that kind of love in our life, it's love season, and with that, we have an audience of folks who are married and folks who are single and folks who are dating or newly divorced, and I think everybody all along the spectrum can relate to having challenges with communication.
Mm.
And so I'd love to just kind of open it up to hear from you. Like, what do you find are some of the biggest pitfalls that people in relationships kind of struggle with as it relates to communication? And what are some things that they can do to overcome those hurdles?
Sure. Well, I think one of the biggest things I see and know is a lack of awareness or an inability to regulate our own sort of emotional triggers that our partners or potential partners um, are so good at eliciting, right? Like,
Mm,
that's sort of the prime space for these parts of us to become triggered. And so oftentimes, because of what we've been through over the course of our lives, our childhood, our previous experiences in relationship, where we've been hurt or experienced what clinician in the field, Dick Schwartz, coins attachment injuries, like, these are really fertile places for us um, to lash out against, because we need to defend them. And oftentimes, if we're not attuned to those triggers in ourselves and doing the work to understand and nurture and regulate them, what tends to happen in our communication with our partners or potential partners is either patterns of avoidance or aggression. We could be passive, and a lot, I see a lot of shame and blame, and it sort of just perpetuates this really difficult cycle of conflict that people find themselves in, unable to ultimately truly repair.
Before you go deeper into that, I just want to touch on this whole idea of triggers, because I think as coaches and people in the mental health space and professionals like yourself, we kind of know what triggers are, but I'm not sure if like the general public kind of really
Mm,
gets that.
yeah.
And I mean, I've been exposed to this from a coaching perspective where we're kind of taught like to be aware of what you bring to the coaching seat. Because if your client says something that kind of steps on a rough spot for you, if you're not aware of your rough areas, you can
Right.
kind of, your tender areas, for lack of a better word, you can kind of react in a way that is kind of inappropriate or unprofessional. And this
Right.
happens in relationships all the time. And so can you bring our audience through like what a trigger exactly is?
Sure. Yeah. So when someone is triggered, usually it's stemming from an experience they've had in relationship or in the world. Something has happened. Someone has said something, you've witnessed something has happened outside of you that triggers an emotional reaction inside of you. And that could be within the body. You experience heightened sensation, there's an emotion, and there's oftentimes series of thoughts or stories you tell yourself in the mind about what's happening. Now, it's a trigger as opposed to just a pure natural reaction that, and you'd expect anyone to have in that given situation. It's a trigger when you notice yourself really defensive or activated or any kind of extreme charge to the experience you're having means you have been triggered. And what that means is an older, younger part of you that has been hurt and traumatized or injured in some way is being activated by this thing that's happened. So yeah, that's how I would describe it.
If you realize that there is something that could be a trigger to you as you're communicating with someone you love or with someone you're dating or someone that you're interested in, and they trigger that, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it depends. I mean, I think, awareness of your inner world is a definite primary starting point. So, and I like to give people this technique and strategy, which I think it's a nice starting point. So, and it's snack. And so you can stop. So anytime you experience that heightened state, something's happened, you're feeling that trigger, you stop, you notice what's happening, you accept that it's an experience that's come up, and you get curious about it, right? Like, what is this? Where do I feel it in my body? How intense is this? What is this trying to tell me? Is this proportionate to what just happened? Am I, so you just get curious. That's the into it all, really. And then you offer it kindness, and I think that might be like, oh, that triggered part of you is young and scared, and it needs to know you're here, that you understand it, that this makes sense, and that there's compassion there towards it. And that oftentimes is enough for people's nervous systems to become grounded again, so that then you can be with it in a way that's a little bit more intentional and rational. But oftentimes that place in us activates a more primitive part of our brain that kicks heightened arousal in our nervous system that then we feel like we need to protect ourselves through fighting or fleeing or freezing. And sometimes, getting out of the situation is indicated and can be enough, but oftentimes, fighting doesn't make it better. Freezing renders us feeling powerless and worse too. So yeah, so SNAP is an acronym that I encourage people to use. And I just say that I think part of the curiosity piece there can be, and the compassion and the kindness piece is, I think, where the healing can take place. And so oftentimes that requires the support of some type of therapist or healer or coach like you to really do a bit of unpacking with that trigger so it can really be fully known and witnessed and understood and released.
Mm-hmm. Do you recommend that the person who is triggered, if we're talking about the trigger happening within a romantic context, so the romantic partner triggered the person, do you recommend that they communicate that process to the person who triggered them? Do you recommend that they wait, they do the snack process, they wait, and then they bring it up at a later time? Or do they just let it go? Like, maybe it's just one of those things where it's like, I shouldn't be triggered over that. Like, it really is ridiculous. I just need to shake that off. What's your opinion?
Right. Yeah, I think it definitely depends. And I think more often than not, when you do this process, you realize increasingly it's okay to let go of so much more than you have been. And, it might be indicated, very indicated, to be vulnerable with your partner when you feel able to express your process in a way that invites them into it. So they have some context, not so that they're held responsible for your emotional triggers, but so that they know that it's something you contend with, that you're working on, and that you may have a request for them around how they can support you with it or show up for you in a way that, you know, it contributes to your own healing. Like, that's fine and natural and healthy. You know, not a demand that they change or do it differently, but just an invitation. Hey, here's how you could support me with this, or here's some of the context around why sometimes this might get intense for me. And I want you to know I'm really working on it, and here's how. And yeah, I mean, I think that's great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we talked a little bit about communication between people who are romantically involved. So if you're married or if you are in a relationship and someone triggers you, how to kind of have that conversation with them and move past that trigger. Are there any communication barriers that you're seeing for folks who are dating or who are newly divorced and thinking about engaging with romantic partners, but they're having trouble kind of being on the same page with their love languages or with their attempts for communication? What tips do you have for us with that?
Yeah, I think in that vein, it's not actually that dissimilar. You know, I think, I mean, in that place, people are probably having to get more clear on what their values are and what they're really wanting in relationship, sort of using the learning from past relationships and any heartbreaks they're having to heal from to influence the standard they're setting in any new romantic endeavor. And so being really clear about that for themselves, I think, is a great starting point. You know, and then I think uh, I see a lot of women and men, you know, who are approaching dating, um, struggling with some of their own attachment injuries and the way it's showing up. And for those who are anxious, can sometimes jump into maybe communicating too much too soon or expecting more from the dynamic, like wanting to give trust sooner than has been safe, like sooner than it's actually capable of being established.
Mm.
So I'd say for those who are especially coming off the heels of divorce or you know, I'd say when you're approaching dating, steady and slow is a nice way to protect you, you know, cautious optimism. It's like you need to sort of be discerning with potential partners if you're looking for something serious and long term. And I think it's nice to sort of explore and experiment a little bit with how authentic can you be in what you share, and how safe do you feel when you share something vulnerable? Do you feel heard? You know, are you able to listen? Does there feel like there's intention behind the dialogues you're having? So I don't think it's that different. The playing field's a little different, and you probably won't be on the first date or second or third disclosing the depths of your emotional triggers. You
Mm.
know, but you might be exploring how safe this person feels in communication, or you know, that type of a thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So along those lines of with feeling safe in communicating clearly, I guess, and openly and honestly with someone, if you are starting to engage in a relationship with someone, because I get this from a few folks who are clients of mine and they're starting to explore, you know, other relationships, and then they realize that, like, nope, that's not really for me, and they don't really know how to communicate out of it. And so
uh yeah.
what would you say
Mm.
to them in terms of, you know, and maybe it's not a trigger, but they're communicating clearly, and then they realize that, you know what, I don't feel safe communicating with this person, or this person is not a great fit for me. What happens then when you want to be authentic and transparent in love and relationships?
Right. Yeah, and you know, we contend with these days the horrific phenomena of ghosting,
Yes.
which is just so tremendously painful for those who are, you know, who have to endure it. It's awful and confusing. And so I think that I'm so glad you're asking this, because I feel like this is a chance to implore people to uh you know, be decent, you know, and so I don't see how, I mean, uh, I think I think it's along the same lines, you know, of what would, I think the question becomes, what is the fear And where is that coming from? Is that a legacy you've inherited from your childhood, or about people pleasing or conflict avoidance, or, like, what would prevent you from being clear and direct with someone about the status of what you want and how you feel? Like, and if that, if that is hard, I'm not saying it shouldn't be, or that it's not okay that it is, but I think that's an invitation for you to explore why and what you need from yourself to cultivate the courage to do it. Because oftentimes when we communicate from that authentic place, embedded in that is love. Even if the other person ends up being disappointed by it or hurt by it, that's okay. And it's not our job to protect them from that. It's our job to honor what is real and true for us. And oftentimes people almost always respect and appreciate that. We all just want what's true. That's all we want from each other and from ourselves. We all just want what's true. Yeah. So, yeah.
One thing that you just said there that was so powerful was like choosing love over fear. Like, I choose to spread love, to give love, to show love to this person by being honest and transparent with them, instead of choosing fear, which is, I'm just going to ghost, like,
right,
and that's where it came from. I think the whole aspect of it came from a lot of people just not being brave enough to have a real, open, honest conversation with somebody that you might or could care about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, and so again, I think it's only just an invitation for that person to explore their own fear there. It's not to shame or blame, but it is to take responsibility for the impact that kind of behavior has on the other person. And to get really curious about that way in which someone who struggles with that is protecting themselves from some more hurt, fear-based place in them.
Okay, so enough of advice for these single people. Let's get back to the married folks like me. So
let's get there.
So what would be your top 3 tips for those folks who are married out there and who want to strengthen their communication with their partner?
I really, truly, primarily prescribe intentional dialoguing. And so what I think that means is being committed to having conversations about you too, about if it's a monogamous relationship, about every week, a little bit every day. I know some people who do it a little bit in the morning and a little bit at night, and really create that time to be intentional in the dialogue about how this is going, and how are you feeling, and how am I showing up, and do you need anything, or how do I have capacity to give it, and so yeah, I think really creating time to be intentional in the dialogue about the relationship, the dynamic, the needs, the status, all that stuff, because it's always changing, and it should be, and that's how we grow and deepen. And so I think sort of implicit in that is both partners need to be willing to be uncomfortable in that way, like, and invest the energy and the time, the priority to doing the work it takes to be in a relationship that's fluid and open in communication in that way.
Last one, make it good, Dr. Rachel.
Yeah, I think the last tip is really along the lines of what I've been talking about today, which is each partner also not just committing to be intentional in their dialogue at the relational level with one another, but each partner committing to checking in with themselves and to being committed to their own inner process, and coming to the table with that regulated stance.
It's like modeling the love that you want to receive by first giving it to yourself. Yeah.
Love exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing these beautiful tips. I think that, these are game changers for so many people in and out of relationships all over the globe that listen to this show. And so, Dr. Rachel, if you could look back and give your 10-year younger self any piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would be, I have a bit of a mantra this year that I seem to be connecting to, a couple of them. And one is to trust the unfolding. I would tell my younger self, trust the unfolding, or at least connect to the prayer that, may I trust the unfolding. I give her that. And then I just, know that a higher version of her is here and deeply, relentlessly loves her, and that she's exactly where she's meant to be.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today. How can our audience find and support your work?
Such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. S. Everybody can find me anywhere online at Hey Dr. Rachel, Hey DrRachel. I'm most active on Instagram, and if people are connecting to me and what I'm saying today, I would encourage them to follow me there and send me a direct message. I'm active there, and I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to connect. And then my website is just heydrrachel.com.
Beautiful. All right, Dr. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us today, and I can't wait to have you back.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. Thanks so much for listening to the show today. And as always, for more resources as you continue to live out your beautiful mission of healing the world and grow your beautiful business, you can head to www.shehealstheworld.com/freebie to see what new resources I have in store for you. Thanks for listening. Tell a friend, and I can't wait to see you at the next episode.